This is a placeholder musical theme for the entitled OG Games podcast. Release me from my torment, find a name for the whole thing.
Welcome to the pilot episode 0 of the yet-to-be-titled OG podcast. I promise we'll define the topic around in a second, but first, let's be civil and present the host of the day. Today with me are Mark Wilson.
Hello, hello. Nice to be here. My name's Mark. I've been a member of the OG Guild for quite a while, since almost its inception, but not quite, and have really enjoyed seeing the Guild grow into things like the live play sessions that we've created, which I've been a big part of, and also things like this podcast. So I'm excited to talk some games.
Also with me today, someone who has been very seminal into the creation of the Guild, TOTD Martin.
Hello, great to be here. Yep, I love the Guild. It's just been such a fun place to hang out on BGG with people who feel the same way most of the time about games as I do. Have for a long time been a huge fan of simpler rule sets, shorter games, and lots of interaction. And I think those are some of the key ingredients of the OGs we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, that's something we'll talk about in a second. But finally, first, I'm Nicolas. My job here is to relentlessly butcher English grammar and pronunciation, and I have been preemptively sentenced to editing the podcast afterwards. So I think we should get started immediately by defining the terms of the subject, in case of someone exterior to the Guild comes to discover this podcast, or just rewind in time to episode 0 to see what this is all about. Hello, future listener. So what the heck is the OG Guild of Board Game Geek? I don't even know if we talk about that. What's Board Game Geek?
Board Game Geek is the Wikipedia of board games on the internet, is how I talk about it. But it also allows for a lot of discussion and interaction with fellow gamers. So it's more than just a database and repository of information.
Yeah, if Wikipedia had a social network attached to it.
Right.
Well, if Wikipedia had forums, the thing that existed 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And within these are an amount of groups that have more niche center of interest, and called guilds. And the OG Guild is one of these groups, which is centered on old school German style games. What are those precisely? And I don't know how to end sentences visibly.
Right. So, Nicolas gave a little bit of an introduction, talking about the Guild on Board Game Geek, which is a group of us that are over 1,000 people, 1,000 members at this point, interested in a particular style of games that we've attempted to define for ourselves. And before I start, there isn't going to be a hard and fast definition. There's not going to be an exact definition, but we're going to talk about a lot of different characteristics that sort of define these games that we all tend to love. And there are a lot of games within this group, and we'll talk about specifics later on. But in general, we can talk about a little bit about the design school and some characteristics of these games. So, the Guild is for enthusiasts of old school German style board and card games. With the advent of the internet in the 1990s, going all the way back, and if you're younger than the 90s, welcome to our world. So with the advent of the internet in the 1990s, hobbyists began to discover wonderful board games from other parts of the world that they hadn't previously been exposed to. In particular, board games popular in Germany at the time introduced many outside Europe to the quote-unquote German school of board game design. And this eventually came to include more than just German designers, but many of the early people in this German school came out of that country and that area of the world. And it helped to spark the growth of the board game hobby worldwide. So what is the German School of Board Game Design? So again, categorization is going to be challenging because there's a huge variety of games, and there are literally thousands of games coming out and tens of thousands already out there. So there's going to be edge cases and things that are a little bit harder to define. But in general, games of this design philosophy often feature a few characteristics. One, they have clean and streamlined rule sets without many exceptions, which makes them relatively easy to teach, but it still provides opportunities for tactics and strategy. Number 2, they have few, if any, special powers or abilities for various combinations, which can add a lot of complexity to the rule set and the design. Number 3, they have a shared physical or social game space. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about shared space later on. But it is a shared physical or social game space with little of the gameplay happening on individual player boards. And fourth, non-combative but necessary player interaction. So player interaction can run the gamut in terms of different mechanisms that are involved in that interaction, but it involves direct player interaction in some form.
Yeah, the non-combative part in particular is something that we don't discuss a lot and is not necessarily extremely agreed upon, but it's an offshoot of the kind of games that were developed for families in Germany in the 1990s. So you want things to have a bit of, like, if you have a family, you know that they're all a bunch of twats, right? You want to have a go at them, but you have to have a go at them in a non-bloody way, in a socially acceptable way, and this is what it is about.
Right. Yeah, so a lot of these have like the family game attached to them, and that can still include a lot of tactics and strategy. So it can get pretty in-depth, but you're still going to have those streamlined rule sets. So we don't want to get too hung up on exact definitions. There are going to be exceptions, but we focus on sort of the feel of the game and the general characteristics of these games. So we'll talk more specifics in a moment about particular games, but this style in general was most popular in the 90s and then into the 2000s. And internationally, these games they were known as German games or German style games, and then eventually they took on the moniker of Euro games or simply Euros. But over time, these styles and these words and these definitions tend to change, and this is no exception. So hobby board games often became more complex, and the styles of games changed, and these gradually evolved over time so that Euro games, what was known as Euro games back in the 90s and 2000s, came to be known as something different, and newer games that had different characteristics and were more complex and had engine building and tableau building and point salad. And some of these mechanisms that we've come to know in the last 10 years or so also came to be known as Euro games. So newer people entering the hobby who either were possibly unaware of that classical usage of the term, they saw these games being called Euro games, and they didn't really have a great way to describe the Euro games of yesteryear, of the 90s and 2000s. So occasionally we'll refer to something like OGs or German style as opposed to modern Euros. So the Guild, and really this podcast in general, is to appreciate and celebrate these old school or classic Euros that were most popular back then. Now, of course, there's still new games coming out in this style, but that is when they had their sort of zenith of popularity. So we'll call them German style games, we'll call them OGs, but hopefully we're able to separate the two so that it's not confusing. I do want to emphasize this next point. The goal of this Guild and the podcast, and really everything we're about to say, the goal is not to bash any style of game. So occasionally we're going to have to draw comparisons between modern Euros and old school Euro games. And this is not to bash modern Euros, but it is to draw the distinction between them, because we do see the distinction and we want to celebrate this type of game. So we have people in the Guild, and I mean the three of us as well, like all different styles of games. And some of them are even in that modern Euro grouping. And so this isn't against any particular style of game, but it is for a celebration and helping to define and bring attention to these older styles of games that have somewhat fallen out of popularity. So we'll talk a little bit more later about designers and games in particular, but hopefully that gives you an overview of what OG games are all about.
Yeah, there's a fine line that we have to walk all the time, which is that, frankly speaking, this Guild came out as a reaction to the prevalence of modern Euro games and the kind of classic design sensibilities getting slowly out the market, which can lead to an amount of frustration. But actually, many of us also like modern games equally or less. I don't know. I'll cut that part out, don't worry.
I liked it.
Correct. We do like modern games equally or less. One of those two.
Yeah, I feel like I've been talking about this distinction between those two styles on BGG for years and years and years, and it goes right back to there's this famous Michael Barnes piece about Princes of Florence being the the game that killed Euro games, and he was then very much talking about the transition from something that was quite simple that could be enjoyed by a family, that was quite interactive, into these sort of more baroque, involved, long rule sets, and more heads down style of play. I think quite a lot of hyperbole in that article, but it helps sort of crystallize that distinction. And I think we've been talking about it for a long time. But I think the thing that's been really nice about the OG Guild is that sort of more positivity and looking to celebrate new games in that style, because there are plenty. I mean, there are so many games now. There are games for everyone, so many different games in every style coming out. So I don't think it's really the case that OGs are dying. They're still around. There are still good ones. I think we'll be talking about some recent ones, and we've had a couple of geek lists sort of looking at more recent games in that style. So I've really enjoyed just being part of a community who want to talk about the good aspects of those games and why we love them and where we're finding it in new games.
Yeah, I don't have too much. I don't have too much to add to what Martin said, but I agree that it's more a transition. Like, you do see certain trends that become predominant in the modern hobby, but it hasn't precluded games of this older style. So it's been cool to see and unearth a lot of those. One of the coolest aspects of the guild for me and meeting a lot of people like you guys is finding some of these gems, because they might not be the single most popular title at a given point, so it might be easy for them to fly under the radar, but they are there. And so finding who these designers are and what the games are has been great for my own personal gaming.
Oh yeah, the main hurdle for newcomers is to tell them, do you like to go on the secondary market and hunt something that has not been reprinted since the 1990s? And that's sometimes a bit of a hard sell. Speaking of which, are you ready to move on to the first proper segment of this show?
It's a topic of the day.
So, the topic of the day is very topically, because the definition has been all good and everything, but for someone who knows nothing about these kinds of game, it's maybe not as useful as being able to go on BoardGameGeek, load up a game page, and see all this is about. Topic of the day is 3 games you would show people to represent OGs.
Yeah, so that's a fun topic. I want to mention, so we did not discuss the 3 games that each of us selected beforehand, so there's some possible overlap here, but I'm really excited to see what you guys picked.
Same.
Yeah, and for that purpose, I have a die to determine the start player. So, the first player will be Martin.
Okay, so
Rotation will be Martin, then me, then Mark.
So we're going to do one each going round?
We're going to do one each.
Great.
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds awesome.
So the first game I picked, and actually dates back to a long time before the sort of peak period of OGs we were talking about in the 90s, and this is a game from the 60s, Sid Sackson's Acquire. And I think the reason I've picked this is that it really was a big inspiration to these OG designers, and also it anticipated a lot of the most important features of OG design that we've talked about already. So I think that the level of abstraction in this game, it's about hotel chains merging with each other, but this is depicted in a quite abstracted way with a simple grid on which you play tiles which have grid references, very simple components, very streamlined rules, but a lot of interaction between the players. There's area majority contests going on all the time. There's an economy to it. It's a really pure design, I think, but one in which you have to watch what all the other players are doing. And the interaction, I would say, yes, it fits that kind of non-combative. It's highly interactive, but you're not burning down the other players' hotels or anything like that. You will find yourself kind of working together in some ways with the other players as well. So I think a really interesting design that was a long way ahead of its time, probably.
It was. The big sell here is you forgot to tell that there's a bunch of maths to do.
Oh, yeah.
No, but I mean, there's going to be a little bit of math in a lot of games that you play, but I absolutely agree. Acquire's one I've not played a ton. I have played it, but Sid Sackson games in general, when the mass market games that a lot of us grew up with were all that was available, he was designing things that were decades ahead of their time, and like Martin said, start inspiring designers throughout the world who were going to take some of these ideas and run with them. of ways that you could design streamlined rule sets, games that played in like 90 minutes or less and still had a lot of depth to them, but you could teach to pretty much anyone in your family if you needed to.
Yeah, hard agree here. So, for my first pick, so I overthought the question, of course, because I'm me.
Yep,
And-
that makes sense. That makes sense.
So there tends to be a small schism in the guild sometimes about what is the absolute central values of OG games. Some people in one camp thinks that it's player interaction. The other camp thinks that it's the simplicity of the rules and the accessibility of the rule set. And there's a third faction that tries to please everyone and says it has to has both. And I'm going to go for these so that I don't make enemies, essentially. So, my first game is For Sale, which is one of the simplest, purest auction game that you could hope for. First, it scales fantastically. You can play it for 3 to 6 players, and the rules are taught in a couple minutes. You don't even have to teach the second half of the game immediately. You have cards on the table. There are as many cards in player. Whoever bails out of the auction the earliest takes the shittiest card, and that's it. Second half of the game, you have a hand of cards. You want paychecks in the middle of the table. Whoever plays the highest card wins the highest paycheck, but you all play at the same time, so you don't know what other people have picked. And that's it. That's the entire game. Wealthiest player wins. I think that For Sale, it's not my favorite game, but it's a 10 out of 10 design for me. It's a rare case where it's a game where I say, if you gave me the power to modify the game, I would remove nothing. And I would add nothing.
Yeah.
Even the bit where the bonk check cards, they would be 1 to 15, but the genius is they just drop the $1 bills and they replace it with 0 for extra drama. And even that is cool and I would not touch it, even though it breaks the numerical sequence. So absolutely perfect. You can play it with sharks. You can play it with your family. It works at low-ish player counts, 3. It scales up to 6. It's very great. And it's short.
Yeah. Well, you know when Nicholas is saying that it breaks a pure mathematical sequence, but he's still okay with it, that it's a good design decision. But yeah, I know Martin loves this one too, so I'll let him chime in here in a second. But it is very universal. It's not even the one like I've gifted For Sale a couple times, and I don't actually own it, but it's so universal that I don't worry about introducing it to anyone. So it's a wonderful design in that sense.
Yeah, so Nicholas has managed to scoop me already because this was going to be my second pick. But yeah, this is a fantastic game, and I was going to pick it specifically because I think that what are often called fillers by some are very much part of the OG space, and card games, you don't have to have a big board for it to be an OG. We've talked about that kind of the idea of everyone being in this shared space and interacting and needing to watch what the other players are doing, and this just absolutely has that. Particularly love the second half, which is so psychological because it's the blind bidding thing going on, and you see what's on offer, and then you think, well, I know someone else has got the 30, but are they going to play it now? Can I get away with playing my slightly lower card? And it always produces some funny moments, and you might end up getting completely unexpectedly great rewards for a terrible card, and vice versa. And this is I think I played this on the very first night I ever went to London on Board, which was my first board games meetup about 15 years ago, and I've been playing it ever since. Recently been playing it online with colleagues from work who I've been introducing to various games on Board Game Arena.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's one that's gone down really well there as well. I think it's one of the greatest short games of all time. So yeah, great choice, Nicholas.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, great choice, both of you. We got a sneak preview of Martin's second game.
It's the first game that Martin played at a board game night, and now look at where he is.
Yeah. All right. So my first game is For Sale. No, it's not. But I'm actually thrilled. So that is also, I want to give a shout out. So the designer For Sale, Stefan Dora, I don't have one of his games, perhaps surprisingly enough, given my taste on my 3, and I'm really thrilled that one of his designs got mentioned here already. So we're kind of hitting some of the hallmarks of OGs, and we're gonna leave some important stuff out, which is part of the fun of having to pick only 3 because it was a hard challenge. But if I'm picking my favorites, and this is revealing a little bit of my taste, my favorite OGs, I'm picking all of the most, like the ones that are closest to the directly combative ones. And so I kind of wanted to avoid just doing that. One of the hallmarks of Euro games in any era really is that there isn't player elimination. So you're not like attacking each other with armies and stuff like that, which would be in a different genre. But there can still be fairly combative mechanics in some of them, but I also appreciate when there's robust interaction in ways that are psychological or spatial that don't involve some of those combative ideas. So my first game exemplifies that and has hung around for since it's been made as one of the most popular hobby games, period, and that's Carcassonne. And Carcassonne, if you're listening to a board game podcast, you probably have heard about Carcassonne or have played it, but it's a tile laying game, and its simplicity itself, in terms of like you draw a tile, you look at that tile, and then you place it somewhere orthogonal to an existing tile on the board, and then you have some meeples that you can optionally place that will eventually score you points. And it seems almost too simple. Like people play for the first time and they're thinking to themselves, like, what exactly is here? Is there enough meat on this game for it to work? And the answer, of course, is yes. The answer, of course, is yes.
There is enough meat for a world championship of it.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. So like you take that premise, like I taught you the structure of the game in 30 seconds, and there's world championships for it. And so the idea of a shared space, because you're building it together and everyone's sort of populating it together. And so it quickly becomes thinking about not just what's going to be best for you, but anticipating the plays of your opponents, anticipating the types of tiles that are going to come out and how that'll relate to the board around you, and how you maneuver within this shared and growing space to get the best real estate, as it were, for your own meeples as opposed to your opponents. And it's a devilishly nuanced little puzzle, and you can't do it yourself because it involves the other players and their actions. And one of the funny things, like you can play, my favorite version of Carcassonne might just be the base game, like the original with no additions, but it's also a game that somewhat famously has a ton of different permutations and iterations and expansions and micro expansions and promo tiles, and we sometimes shy away from that in OGs. Like, if the original is good, it doesn't need a bunch of different variations on it. And Carcassonne is perfectly good on its own in its original form. That might still be my favorite version of it. But I think it speaks to how strong the core of the design is when you can add all these little bits and pieces around it, and it still works, and it still has that same core appeal. There are others, like it's not on my list, but like Ticket to Ride is another one like that, where the core of it is so strong that you can add a lot of things in the different versions of it, and it still works as a design because that core appeal is so strong. So I have a lot of fun playing Carcassonne. I haven't played all the expansions. There's too many of them to try out all of them. But I always enjoy playing, and this isn't even nostalgia talking. So this wasn't like the first game I played or whatever. I didn't discover Carcassonne until like 2018, quite a while after I had become a hobby gamer. And I played many games that Carcassonne inspired. And once I finally sort of understood what was going on in Carcassonne, I said, oh, this is actually better than a lot of the games it inspired. And it inspired me to play more and more of it. So that's my first.
Nice. This actually was the first one that for me that got me into the whole thing. So I was visiting a friend in 2007, I think, and he said, "Oh, do you want to play a game?" I didn't really know what to expect. I've always liked playing games. I like Scrabble, card games. I've always played games, but he brought out this Carcassonne. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what it was, and
it looks bland.
Yeah. and we just started playing, and I thought, wow, I love this. This is great. And I asked him a bit more about it. Where could I find a copy of this? And he said, I was visiting London. I didn't live there at the time, and he said, oh, there's a game shop near the British Museum, and I had some free time the next day, so I thought I'd go and have a look and get myself a copy of Carcassonne. I just remember walking into this shop, and then there were steps down into the basement, and I went down these steps, and there was just this huge room just the walls all covered with these completely unfamiliar games. And I thought, wow, there's this whole hobby, this whole scene that I had no idea existed.
Yeah.
So Carcassonne was really the the gateway game, as they say, for me, and I played it a lot then with friends, and gradually got deeper and deeper into the whole thing from there. So yeah, this is definitely a great pick.
We didn't scoop you again, did we, Martin?
Well, I wasn't going to pick it, but when For Sale got scooped, I was thinking if I had to make a quick substitution, maybe Carcassonne, and then immediately you picked it. So yeah.
Oh no.
So the thing is, we've been talking about Carcassonne like it's this master strategy game full of finesse and whatnot, but it's not how you sell the game to other people. It has other qualities. You place a tile, and the tile has to match this landscape puzzle that you're all building together. And even though the gameplay makes you try to compete for areas by having more pawns than your opponent in there, you're also just together building this lovely little landscape, depending on the edition you have, that is just rewarding in itself. And that's how you get other players to trick them to come play your silly strategy games.
No, that's true. It's easy to get into, but it is hiding a lot under the surface, and I think that's a common quality of a lot of good OG games.
I suggest we rotate the starting players, so second round will be me, then Mark, then Martin. So Martin, you have a bit of time to think about another pick if you want to, but normally I wouldn't let it slide. You would just have to shut your mouth and tell us when the moment comes.
Oh yes, because of course Martin can't talk about more than 3 OG games. He doesn't know anything about any more of them.
My second pick was motivated by what I don't know which of you has told before, that Force occupies that space that we often call fillers. And I'm like, if I'm talking to outsiders of the guild, they might conclude that the OG guild is about fillers, which is not the impression that I want to leave. So I've been trying to find a game that has simple rules, player interaction, but also feels like a meaty game. And I ended up on another auction game, because apparently I like those. Spoiler, I like auctions and area control, so you will hear these words a lot coming from my mouth in the future. For today, I picked a 1990s game by Stefan Dora. Is it Stefan Dora? Marrakesh.
Hey.
Marrakesh is this pretty simple game where you have the city of Marrakesh, but with an A because you're trying to make cash, and you just have a lot of tourists who are coming and who are interested in a very precise type of merchandise. So they are color-coded and will enter the corresponding color-coded shop. And on your turn, all you do is either you take one of the shops on the board and you put it on auction, or you take a pack of tourists and you move them along a road, and they stop to the first shop of the given color that they like. And that's it. That's the entire game. Problem, you have one action per turn. There are, hopefully, 4 players. They all want different things. You have to compromise with them. You have to lure them to overpay for things that you put on auction because they want it more than you. And mostly, if they pay a lot for things, you take a cut. If a lot of tourists enter their shop due to one of your moves, you take a cut. And this game is fantastic. If that sales pitch doesn't do it for you, you will probably hate it. If you have sparkles in your eyes, go find a copy. You won't, because it's out of print. Unfortunately, I'm the worst marketer.
Yeah, this is the anti-buyer's guide podcast for anyone listening, by the way, because all we're going to do is talk about like 50% of the games we're going to talk about are out of print. So
okay, so Carcassonne is eternally on print because like it's one of the biggest, like one of the 5 best sellers of the hobby. For Sale is also very rarely not on print and currently has a yellow edition, IELLO, that has a very small footprint if you like that. So go grab a copy. It's like €13 or something and takes very little space on your shelf, like the size of a book.
Martin and I are both going to agree, but Martin, you actually you were one of the like driving forces that got me to play Marrakesh. So I have you to thank for that.
Yeah, this was one that I kind of unearthed when I was digging back through past years of BGG ranked games and just trying to play some of the top games that sounded interesting to me. So I guess in the sort of late 2000s when I was really getting into the hobby and started getting into all these 90s games and trying all of Knizia's classics, and then I was having a look what else was out there, and there was this game from 1996, Stefan Dora, who I really liked, and it sounded interesting, and I found a secondhand copy fairly easily, I think, and fairly cheap, and just a really cool, really interesting game that it's just full of these shared incentives, and it's all about trying to persuade the other players that the best thing for them to do is help you. So again, that sort of positive interaction. You're not destroying stuff, you're trying to get other people to help you without maybe even realizing quite how much they're helping you, and I find that a really interesting dynamic in games. I haven't played it loads of times face to face. I've played it online some as well, which has been quite a few of these older, more obscure games. We've started coming up with ways to play them online. Playingcards.io is a nice site that really stripped down, doesn't enforce rules or anything, but lets you just create components that can be dragged around. And because a lot of these OG games are so simple and have so few components, not much text, they're a really natural fit for that platform. So it's been really fun playing it again recently online and getting more people into it, like Mark.
Yeah, and this is one that I've actually played with the both of you live, and it's been tons of fun. I'm in the process of designing my own board because it is out of print, and so that I can have a physical copy, because that's the path of least resistance to me, rather than trying to figure out someone with a secondhand copy and paying for shipping and all that. So that's been a fun little project for me. You mentioned the shared incentives, and the line I've used for this once or twice is that it's the only game I think I've ever played, maybe ever, where you could potentially get more of your final score on other players' turns than your own. And so, again, simple rules, couple different actions, that's all you can do. But the emergent depth from that is profound, and it involves everyone else at the table, which is really nice. And so I always enjoy that because it becomes a little bit psychological, and you really do have to think about what everyone else is doing. So yeah, great game.
And speaking of player involvement, one of the things I think is great about Marrakesh is that we often talk about negotiation games as these things like, will you sell me your property in Monopoly or something like that, or other kinds of game where you have to discuss a lot and where people who are very boasty and very chatty will do well. In Marrakesh, if you don't want to, you never have to discuss plays with other players outwards, and the negotiation will happen anyway because there's a built-in auction system and because your actions signal to other players what may be important. So if you're someone who's socially awkward, socially anxious, you can have that level of interaction and sometimes that level of cheering and of joy without the stress of having to impose your persona onto other people. And I think that's very cool about this game.
That's a good way of looking at it. I like that. It's also a wonderful transition into my second game, if I'm going next. And so it's a good transition because you talked about stressful interaction directly with other players. And
your Mark, so it's going to be stressful.
Yeah. So you were like, oh, it doesn't require that you have to trade a bunch of things and talk constantly. And I'm like, oh, I'm about to talk about the game he's referring to. So preamble aside, my second game is Bonanza. So let's talk about some cutthroat bean farming. And this is a game that requires a lot of table talk. But it's also one that I think highlights some OG characteristics in ways that we don't normally think of it. So, in your area majority games, there's usually a map or a board that you can point to. Here's the shared space. Even in something like For Sale, there's a central area where your focus is. In Bonanza, you've got your stuff in front of you, but your focus really is on the other players. And so it's heads up. So it's very psychological. The shared space is in each other's, it's the shared social space between you that kind of exists in the middle of the table in that interplay. The rules, as is usual for an OG, super simple. So you can teach it in under 5 minutes. There's one or two things that new players might have to get used to, but once you've been playing for 15 minutes, you're just in the game. You're past the rules and you're into the game. And that's beautiful to me. And then it induces so much table talk. And so it does, it is it's a socially demanding game. Let's not beat around the bush there. So it isn't going to be for everyone. It is a very direct trading game and negotiation game. And so that limits its audience occasionally if that's not your thing. But you're not having to worry about parsing the rules at that point. You really are. It just is table talk the game at that point, where you try to make the most advantageous trades and get the beans in your fields that you need. And it's a goofy theme. And there's actually, I called it cutthroat bean farming at the start. And you can play it in a cutthroat way. But honestly, like, the person who cooperates the best is oftentimes going to be the one who wins. Because you might do a trade that's even a little bit more advantageous for somebody else than it is for you. But if you can do a bunch of those trades with people at the table, then you're going to benefit more than any one of them. And that's a lot of trading and negotiation games. So it incentivizes working together to a certain extent, even though ultimately you are all against one another. And the last thing that I love that Bonanza does is that it's not free-for-all trading. There are other trading and negotiation games that are sort of free-for-all, and those are really good too. I enjoy some of those as well. But in making trades like one-to-one in Bonanza, so if it's Martin's turn, I can't negotiate with Nicolas, and vice versa. And so it limits the nature of it a little bit, but it allows for something that's even cooler to me occasionally, and that's that you can weigh in on trades to try to talk people into or out of trades that don't even involve you, because you can see them helping one player more than another. So it allows for this metagame on top of the mechanical game itself, and those elements that often don't exist when you have too many mechanics are what interest me in a lot of games. So it's that psychological metagame going on over top of the actual mechanics. And so that's kind of why I love Bonanza, because it's the quickest route to that style of gameplay for me. And it's also, Uwe Rosenberg from 1997, so it's very much within the era of all of these games, and I think helped to define some games that came after it.
And it's also a game that's just plain silly, right? The main gimmick,
Right,
I don't know if you've talked about the main gimmick, which is you have a hand of cards, you can't reorganize it ever. If you're a competitive card game player, don't do that. That's cheating. That breaks the game.
Yeah. I should have done more of a game overview, but yeah, I mean, it's a card trading game where it's silly looking animated beans on your cards. And so it's kind of goofy, and the goofy premise, I think, helps that as well.
And the point is that because you can't reorganize your hand, you have to do trades in order for you to be able to rearrange what's on the top of your hand, because you will have to plant it on your turn.
Exactly.
Which means that you can have a bunch of strangers, and immediately after 2 or 3 turns it clicks, and you have people who have never talked to each other who just go, hey, do you want to trade this 0 bean from yours in exchange of I give you 3 beans from me because I don't want them at all. Do you want 3 beans?
Yeah. It creates moments of emergent hilarity sometimes, because you might legitimately look at somebody else and say, do you want this bean card? I'll just give it to you. There's no trade. You just need to get rid of it so desperately that you're willing to just give it away. And so it creates moments like that are just, it's funny. It might actually be the best play for you as well to get rid of that bean card, but it's not how we normally think of trading games. And so you might just be begging someone to take the card that's on the top of your hand so you can get to more advantageous cards for you. So yeah, that's part of what I love about it, is that it creates a lot of restrictions in a simple structure that necessitates you, being interactive with other players.
Yeah, it's one that I haven't played nearly as much as I probably should have. I think I probably first played it at I feel like I've got more and more into that kind of very talky, tradey, that kind of thing. I think I'm more into that than I maybe was when I first played it, and I probably should go back to it and play it some more. I think there's a thing as well where maybe one edition they added more cards and the game can be kind of long, maybe it kind of overstays its welcome, whereas the original rules it was a bit snappier. I don't know, something like that. But Rosenberg, quite an interesting designer as well, in that he was really known for this kind of quirky card games. Mamma Mia is a brilliant game by him that I love, where you're making these pizza recipes and there's a memory element to it. And then he went personally through the same transition we've been talking about and started making these crazy, complicated worker placement games. So quite an interesting trajectory he's had in the hobby as well. But yeah.
I mean, would you blame him given the money it's making?
Yeah. I suppose not. Interestingly, though, I have a club that I play a lot of my games in, but then I also have a couple offshoot groups. And one of the offshoot groups we literally formed because of an incredible session of Bonanza. And I think like if you jive socially with a group in a game like Bonanza, you can kind of figure out what type of gamers they are, what type of people that they are. And we finished the game and we were immediately like, we need to exchange numbers and play more games. And it was because in 45 minutes to an hour, we had enough interaction that we felt comfortable with that. Like that's incredible. And there's only so many types of games that can do something like that for me, where I would feel that level of camaraderie with basically strangers after no more than an hour. So, it really speaks to the power that games can have in a social sense. And with that, I think we're on to Martin's next.
Oh, yes. So,
yeah.
my substitution. I was just scrolling through trying to think of what I should pick. And actually there are, as we alluded to, there are so many possible things we could talk about.
Yeah.
But I think it would be remiss when we're talking about OGs not to talk about Catan. I think this was one I played very early on, soon after Carcassonne, and played a lot. Don't play it much these days, but I would happily play it. And I think it's an interesting one in that it's very much a strategy game. You're doing this building thing. There is an engine building element to it. You're putting down settlements which are going to collect more resources, which you're going to turn into more settlements and roads, and there's network building. There's quite a lot going on, but also it has that social trading aspect to it as well. You're making deals with people. There are certain ways you can really screw people over. I was just like, this is so clever. This is so brilliant. And it just made me really want to play more and more of these games. And obviously was a massive hit, has countless spin-offs like Carcassonne, but has this sort of slightly strange attitude I find to it now on BGG and among some gamers of, Catan, it's it's a bit passé, like, oh well, it was okay for its time, but games have got better since then, and this kind of thing. And I just find that, well, I don't agree. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, you're going to be preaching to the choir here, I think, with that. But I've noticed an undercurrent of that sentiment as well. Of course, it's not everyone, and a lot of people still love Catan. It's one where it was one of the first games I played when I was entering hobby gaming, as it was for many people. I don't think I appreciated what it was doing at the time as much as I might now. And somewhat ironically, it was the trading portions of it that were the most intimidating to me, because I don't think I had wrapped my head around those portions of the game. And so I kind of kept my distance from it and was like, yeah, Catan's fine, but I don't think it's for me. If I were to play now, and it's been a while since I think I would appreciate it a lot more, because I would lean into those elements now that I have. So I think it speaks to, like, there can be an intimidation factor with that, like, oh my God, I have to trade these resources. How do I do that? Like, what's good, what's bad? So it can be a little bit intimidating, even though we think of it as a gateway game, but it lends a lot more depth to it when you add it on to that strategy game that's going on there as well.
I think you should try it again, because it's one of these games where you can only negotiate with the players whose turn it is. So exactly like Bonanza.
Yeah.
So you would probably love destroying others' deals when it's not your turn and you're not even involved in that.
Why do you have to put it in such negative framing? Now, of course, that's what I would do, but I don't want you saying that on the podcast.
Why do you consider that a negative?
I don't. See, that's the beauty of games like this, actually. So it's one that I want to play again, but because a lot of people feel like they've moved on from it, it's a surprisingly hard one to get to the table sometimes.
Yeah.
The thing about Catan is that there is no game that has done Catan but better, so I don't know why people think it's obsolete by now.
Yeah.
At least to my knowledge.
Yeah. I will say in subsequent years, I've had the thought, just playing, and usually more modern Euros, where I think to myself, man, if I could trade these resources, this would suddenly become a much better game for me. And I think it's just games that forgot that lesson from Catan, just adding that one additional layer. So I don't know that would probably introduce all sorts of design related problems in some of the games where I've had that thought. But I think it means I definitely would like Catan a lot more than I did when I first played it.
Also, pro tip, if you want to get accepted by the guild more than we are right now, you call the game Settlers instead of Catan. That's a thing to prove your old 1990s cred.
Or Die Siedler von Catan.
Or Die Siedler von Catan. Yep.
Ooh, yeah. I think by the time I played it, it was already Catan. So I'm probably the most recent entrant into the hobby, even though I've been playing, it's been hundreds of games over the last decade or so. I wasn't around when like the original German naming existed for some of these.
Rotation of the start player again.
I was gonna ask, are we doing the rotation again? Let's do it.
Yeah, you start, then Martin, then me.
Okay. So I would be remiss if I've tackled, what did I tackle? All right, tile laying. And so I was kind of thinking in terms of mechanics and wanting to like create a broad canvas so that I didn't have too many of one style. And so we've got tile laying with Carcassonne, even though that's not the entirety of what's going on there, and negotiation and trading in Bonanza, and now area control or area majority with one of my favorites and maybe my absolute favorite, Mexica, by the dynamic duo of Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, who have designed probably dozens of games together. I don't know the exact total, but they are a prolific design duo who have made many games in this style, not just area control, but OG games in general. And I will say, before I say anything about Mexica, is that Mexica is the one that I know a little bit better, but pretty much everything I'm about to say about Mexica also applies to Tikal, also by this design duo, and some other games by them as well that are just as well known and arguably a little bit more popular, that people in the guild and people in the hobby will know about and have played. So in Mexica, you start on a big island, and you are tasked. You're engineers. You're tasked with constructing the city of. I don't want to try the pronunciation because there's no way I get it right. But an Aztec city that will remain unpronounced by me, at least. You guys can try if you want. And you have a certain number of action points on your turn. You have 6 action points, and you can spend them however you want on certain types of actions. And initially, it seems like, there's a bunch of different types of actions that you can do. People sometimes like get a little wide-eyed looking at this, but really they fall into one of like 2 different categories for the most part. And that's either placing something on the board to help build the city, or moving your meeple around, moving your engineer around, so that you can quote unquote found certain areas of the city that the emperor is requesting, or just to build certain structures in different places to try to get majorities in certain places. So I sometimes compare this to El Grande, which also involves Wolfgang Kramer, not Kiesling, but half of the duo was involved in that. And in El Grande, you have sort of set areas that you're vying for. In Mexica, you're asked to create the areas and sort of design it yourself. So you're creating the areas that you're fighting for and then fighting over them. And it's not zero sum, which is nice. Some people don't like zero sum area control, where it's either me or you and there's no in between. So you can be second or third, or there's tie structures and things like that in certain areas. But as you define the map, it starts to take shape. And some really lovely things happen within this structure. There's a lot of emergent depth and emergent complexity, which I like. So if I'm going to have complexity in a game, which does exist in Mexico, I want it to be because of the considerations that you start to have as a result of these simple rules. And so if you're building structures and moving around, and you're building riverways, eventually you have to figure out how to maneuver around the board to get to where you need to be to maximize your chances. And everyone else is doing that too. And it also creates a lot of opportunities to make the terrain more difficult for others. So you're not attacking them. You're never doing something like that. But you can force me to spend 5 action points to escape a certain area instead of just moving out of it with 2 action points. And there's a lot of clever, subtle ways to do that in the game. And so it becomes sort of a spatial puzzle as well as a control, area majority and area control puzzle. And everything is on the shared space. You're not really, it's not heads down. You can't be in your own little world because it's usually going to be played at 3 or 4 players. So everyone else is doing the same thing and sort of rearranging the board state. So you have to take that into account and see where you're going to be able to get the most value. So I absolutely adore this game. Martin mentioned the playingcards.io platform, which is like a more or less open source platform for designing 2D board game implementations online that you can just load up and play. So I've been working on one for Mexico because I think it's a really fun design, and I don't get enough of it in my life. I do own it. I've played it a number of times, but I still want to play it more just because I think it's so interesting, just diabolically interesting once you get to like that latter half of the game where you've got this like maze-like spatial puzzle and this sort of cutthroat area control puzzle. Hitting another major tentpole of the genre with Kramer and Kiesling, because that design duo helped to define a lot of what we're talking about, frankly. So wanted to make sure I hit upon that as well, since Mexico is one of my favorites.
Yeah, they notably help design too many action points per turn. So if you have a group where you know that they're relatively slow players, I would think twice before trying this one and expect it to hit the marketed playtime, because it's a game where you can bonk action points for future turns, so that's a consideration, but also the board state changes so much between your turns that it's not a game where you can necessarily plan your turn ahead.
It's very tactical. Yes, it's very tactical.
You must be able to make quick, snappy decisions when it's your go again.
Yeah. No, that's all true. That's all true. I haven't had too many issues with that, but some others have. So yeah, it's definitely a good consideration.
Yeah, I had the issue with that much more with Java, one of the other members of this trilogy, where I remember eating my whole dinner in between 2 of my turns. But Mexico I find a bit more snappy, and I like that it has I think you only have 6 action points. You have more. You have 10 in Tikal. In Mexico you have 6 action points, and also if you can't think of anything to do with the last one, then you can just go, I'll just take one of these tokens and I'll figure out something to do with it later. And actually several of the actions, building these big buildings uses up several of your action points anyway, so it's not like you're doing 6 different things every turn. What I do really like about the action points in it is that it lets you be really creative, I think, and there are so many sneaky things you can do in Mexico. It just gives you lots of opportunities to
I think you hit on it with saying creative. It allows me to feel like I'm being creative or dumb, which is great too, because like it's on me at that point. So like you can do something and then immediately see, oh no, that wasn't a good idea. But it kind of gives you the rope to tie your own noose, or to do really clever creative things, because it is so open with how you use those action points.
Yeah, and the creativity doesn't come from complications, because you have an amount of different actions possible that cost a different amount of action points, but they boil down to move your dude or place a thing on the board next to dude, the end.
Right, yeah. And it, again, from that simple structure, a lot of, there is complexity that emerges from that, but it's not in having to memorize new rules. It's how to creatively apply them, which is the more interesting puzzle for me.
So, somewhat unbelievably, none of us has mentioned the man himself.
Yeah, thank goodness, because I was like, are we not going to mention him? Oh my God.
So, Dr. Rainer Knizia, I would say he's the greatest designer of board games, full stop, but certainly he has designed a ridiculous quantity of games, particularly in this OG area. And I've played over 100 of them, but that's not even, there are maybe 500 or 600 games he has listed on BGG. I guess a lot of those are simpler. Like, he did a lot of kids games. He did, a lot of very, very simple, some mass market games. He's done a huge range of stuff, but he has done a lot of our type of games as well, and games that have a lot of strategy to them. There are dozens I could have picked here. Tigris and Euphrates is my favorite game, but I'm not going to pick it because the topic here wasn't our favorite games. It was games that we would show people, and Tigris and Euphrates can be quite a daunting one, and certainly I've had friends bounce off it and find their first play just completely baffling and not really been interested in going back to it. And the other thing I wanted to do was make sure that we weren't just talking about all our 90s games and saying, oh, games were better back in the day, you know, all these games from the 90s are so much better than today's games. So I'm going to pick what I think is his best recent game, which is Babylonia, which came out about 3 or 4 years ago. Hasn't, I guess, been an enormous hit, maybe partly distribution, maybe partly the style of games isn't quite as popular as it once was, but I think it's as good as the games that he was doing in the late 90s that he's really known for. I'd say it stands up. It's a tile laying game, and I would say it stands up with Samurai, Tigris and Euphrates, Through the Desert, and actually kind of has some shared elements with each of those games, but does a new thing too. So yeah, a really interesting game, a surprisingly quick game. I would say it takes about 10 minutes per player. So and it's a game that scales really, really well across. Nicolas is making faces. He may take a little longer to play than I do, but it's a game that I find is really worth playing at all of its player counts as well. It's a surprisingly interesting 2-player game, which isn't often true of these OGs, I think, because the type of interaction maybe needs more players to bring it out. But Babylonia, I think, works really well with 2 as well, and then, you know, it's just lightning fast. So it's a tile laying game, you know, where we have a hand of tiles which we're going to be taking turns to take 2 actions. So that nice snappy OG thing, we're just going around. Each of us is going to do 2 things, move on. But there are several different ways of that your tiles are going to score. Partly there's a kind of area control element where we're surrounding features and you want to have more around. There's also a connection kind of thing going on, and one of the ways you're going to make big points is by making long connections with matching symbols. It also, he has done a bit of a taking on some of the modern as well, and there are some special powers. There aren't loads of special powers, but you might pick up 1 or 2 special powers in the course of a game, which will let you break the rules in certain ways, and those give it a nice bit of spice too. So yeah, I just think it's an excellent design that's up there with his best, and this is one that, unlike Tigris and Euphrates, which hasn't been a huge hit with everyone in my group, this one really has. It's been very popular, and that means I can get it played more. And the best games are the games that we can get played, right? And it's also just right now got a new edition which fixes one of the biggest complaints about it, which was the map being quite hard to pass visually. It was quite hard to distinguish the rivers from the land in certain places. I will stick with the copy I have, but certainly it's a good time to buy it if
yeah, it's nice to see a new printing of it. This is one that grew on me. It wasn't an immediate hit with me, and it was actually a little bit of a flop with my primary group. I owned it at one point and then got rid of it, and it took like rediscovering it to sort of see what it was doing. And I agree with what you said. It holds up to his older stuff. It plays really snappy. It's, you know, like even with teaching, I found we were playing games in like 45 minutes or so, which was really nice. And it does have the nice OG thing of like, you've got 2 actions. You want to do way more. You know, it's like I can do this, or I can place these 2 things. You want to do way more than it allows you to on a given turn, which allows for a lot of interesting decisions. That's a hallmark of a lot of Reiner Knizia designs. And I also love that, you know, you pointed out that we're not just stuck in the past here. Like this is a game from 2019, I believe it is. And so this is within the last 5 years, and it's received a new printing within the last year, and it's a vibrant new design that still has a lot of these characteristics. And so, yeah, we're going to talk a lot, you know, we talk a lot about older games because a lot of great games are from back there that are in this style, but they're certainly not the only ones.
Yeah, new games that come in this style often have a problem of discoverability today, because back then, it's not that there are less good games today, it's that there are a lot more games. And the vast majority of them are not in this style, and this style being not the dominant force of the market it was 20 years ago, it gets a bit buried by the marketing of everything else, which is why I like this guild to act as a discoverability outlet for OG games, which are harder to find now, especially new ones. And because like, if you go on Board Game Geek and you leave by the rating system or the how many people have played the game, you might believe that some of these games are worse than they actually are because nobody knows them, and it creates this vicious circle of under-marketed game gets fewer plays, which people take as a hint to formulate unkind conclusions towards it, and then the game gets forgotten for no good reason related to its own merits.
Right. Yeah, and even like in my case, I basically just introduced it to the wrong people. Like, you got to match the game to the group that you're playing with, and if the sensibilities don't match, it's not going to end up being as good of experience as it could be. And so I've really loved this game, but it took finding people who enjoy Knizia games, for example, and his design sensibility, which isn't for everybody. He has kind of an austere design sensibility compared to what some people are used to. That was something that was interesting to me, and I was really glad to come back around to it through the guild, because it allowed me to appreciate it. Once I sunk more deeply into the design to see, oh yeah, there's a lot more depth here than I first thought.
I'm not sure that I would call Knizia's design austere, because they tend to be very simple and very easy to market to family. Like, he's done 600 games. You don't make 600 games if you can't sell them to a sizable public, right? But this one in particular, Babylonia, it took years and years of lobbying from the guild so that I finally try it to begin with. Notably because I couldn't find a copy, but even still, I looked at the game and I was like, there are 4 different ways of scoring. Some of them imply doing multiplications. That sounds like a lot of downtime and a lot of the kind of what we call victory point salad today, that I am not sure is conducive to the kind of gameplay I like. And I finally tried it, and yeah, 10 minutes per player. 15 to 20 minutes per Nicolas, I guess. Even then, like, at 4 copies of myself, we stay at an hour, which is very acceptable.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like best about it, is it leaves you wanting more, I think. So it ends and you're like, wow, okay. And that's a much better feeling than this overstayed its welcome a little bit. And I think a lot of those, like, it's pretty hard to overstay your welcome when you're playing in an hour and a half or less. It is possible depending on the design, but you're going to see it a lot less. And when you have streamlined rule sets, it's going to help with that, because your teach is going to be 5 to 10 minutes max instead of 20 to 30. So it helps a little bit with managing a game night in that sense, I find. And Babylonia definitely has that quality.
Yeah, and a lot of the games today are about the kind of people who like this engineering process, which is, how do I optimize victory? Where here you're all competing on a shared board around different kinds of way of making points. But after your first game, you see someone win by connecting cities together, and you say, I will do that next time and I will win this way. And then you do that and you lose. Because it turns out that every single way of making points is relatively efficient, and it depends on specific board configurations and on what other players do a lot.
Yeah, and I thing that I really appreciate about it is the scoring systems. You talked about the kind of point salad thing, and I think about point salad as being all these kind of disjointed scoring systems, which you can take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from the other place. In Babylonia, There are different ways to score, but they all connect to each other. You're never doing one thing that has no impact on all the other ways there are to score. Like every move you make kind of changes things.
Right. To Nicholas's point, and Martin jumped off on it as well, is that, like, you can't optimize most of these games. Like in Mexico that I mentioned, it's the same way. Like, there are good and bad decisions at any given point that you could make, but there's no such thing like a best strategy because so much of it is determined by what's going on around you. So it's unoptimizable, which is nice. You can become a better player at it, but there's no such thing as like mastering or solving certain portions of the game. And so when we think about mathematical games, sometimes we think about being able to solve it in that sense. Well, if I do this and this and this, I'll get the most points. And in games like Babylonia, even with 4 different interrelated scoring types, there's nothing like that where you can say, here's what I'm going to do and I'm going to get the most points, because it matters what comes out on the board during setup, and it matters more so what other players are doing and what's going to be available to you. So that to me is wonderful, because you're playing the board state and sometimes the players themselves at that point, not just trying to optimize your own mechanical structures.
My last pick is, well, I said earlier that I'm
we got one more. All right, let's go.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I was like, well, good picks, everyone. Good picks.
Good picks, everyone. Now shut up, Nicholas, before you talk about that game. So, as I said earlier, I'm all about auctions and area control. I have had 2 auctions games, so now it's going to be area control, but also I wanted to have a bit of balance in terms of player counts. I saw that the 2 previous games I picked, For Sale and Marrakesh, were not very 2-player friendly. So, area control for 2 players, yeah. And I have forgotten my train of thought. I'll restart.
The suspense is killing me. I don't know what's going on, though.
Yeah. So, 2-4 area control game. Yeah. It's Mexica. But it's not Mexica. It's baby's first Mexica nuggets. Of course it's going to be nuggets.
Nice. Okay. Yep. Let's talk about nuggets.
For people who don't know nuggets, you can't buy it, which is excellent. It's a very simple game. You have a grid of 40 spaces, like a big rectangle that is divided like a big table of chocolate. And I don't know if table of chocolates are divided that way in your places. Do you have chocolate that is?
I'm gonna say yes, because I don't know what's going on right now. So.
So you don't have chocolate that is divided in a little grid of spaces. Yeah, you have.
I guess. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'll find the analogy and cut this entire thing. So, you have this board, which is a grid of little squares, right? 40 little squares in a 8x5 grid. And on some spaces of this board are nuggets, which are worth an amount of points. And all you can do on your turn is either put little walls to delimitate areas to enclose the nuggets, or put one of your control markers down. And whichever player in an area has the highest amount of control power in it gets all the nuggets in it. And that's the entire game. But here's the trick. You play all your stupid control markers face down. And that's where it gets mad. I can't convince you that this game is great, but it is. Most people will probably play it and rate it a 6 out of 10 and move on with their life. But it is actually a very neat distillation of what we thrive for in OGs, which is that I just essentially taught you all the rules. All you have to know is what size an area is allowed to be, and you can start playing. And that's about it. And you can play and you can laugh. It works at 2 players. It works at 3 players, where it gets even madder. It works at 4. Because the same amount of tokens are placed on the board, irrespectively of the amount of players, the game stays the same length, which is ultra short. Even if you're playing with me, it will not overstep 15 minutes. If you are somewhat digital board game friendly, you can just play it on Board Game Arena. Nobody does, and it's a real shame. And currently, if you're part of the OG Guild, it is very currently, for another, by the time this is published, at least 2 weeks, the OG Game of the Month, which means that you will have a very, very easy time finding other players. Beep, 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 beep. Hello, this is an update from Future Nicolas, who wants to apologize for the low amount of remaining March there actually is by the time I'm finished editing. Back to the podcast. Beep, 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 beep. And that's about it.
Yeah,
I think both of you have played the game, so
yes.
You can probably elaborate a bit in a fancier way than me.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. And I mean, that's
Even
a
though
nice.
you don't share my love for it.
No, actually, I really like this one. The comparison to Mexica is basically just that, like, you're cutting up the board and then fighting over those areas, and so there's some surface level similarity, but obviously there's a lot different that's going on there. But
Yeah, it doesn't have any emergent property, but the base idea, the super high surface idea, is that in most area control game, you have areas that you're trying to control. Here it's a game where you simultaneously build the areas and are trying to control them.
right, yeah, exactly.
I find my pitch again. I needed the mark for that.
Yeah, and so Nicholas called it Nuggets, and he mentioned the newer titles. So this actually did
Because
get a
it's called
reprint.
Nuggets.
It's on Board Game Geek as Armadora.
Oh
And
right, I forgot about the don't play with special powers ever.
right. So it's on Board Game Arena. You can play, and it's called Armadora, which is its more recent name. And it also had a recent reprinting called Pearladora. And like, there's some add-ons with it, but the same central gameplay is there. So you might actually be able to find this. The original version that's called Nuggets, you'll probably struggle to find. But honestly, like, it's such a simple design that, like, if you just took the base game without, like, special powers and things like that, you could probably make a print and play copy for yourself pretty easily as well. Like, it wouldn't be too hard to mock up a version of this with some generic components. So it's a fun little game, and I think it has a lot of OG properties.
Also, to be completely frank, the original game looks like a prototype.
Right. That's why I said it was easy to build, because it's basically they basically sold a prototype with the original version.
My partner's main objection against the game is that she fears that she will, like, just blow the board state away if she breathes too hard. That's the quality of components we're talking about. It's very light. It's very small. It has little flimsy wooden enclosures. Yeah. I like it because it's functional, but I would not sell it on its aesthetics. And also, most of the statements about availability that Mark are giving are true if you're living in the US or if you're living on a weird island. Right. Mainland Europe, it's generally easy. And if you live, especially in mainland Europe, and especially within the EU when you have no taxes on import because you're within the common market, it's easy enough to import these games for a reasonable price from, say, Germany, where they have so many copies that they do not inflate the price over time. So I would not be surprised. I bought my copy for €3.
Nice. Martin, I don't think I've actually heard your thoughts on this one.
Yeah. So I have played this precisely once, and surprise, surprise, it was with Nicolas. I played it on Board Game Arena with Nicolas and Guild founder Daryl, and it was cool. I liked it. I'd play it again. I definitely see that sort of comparison you're making about the building the areas and also controlling the areas. I seem to remember I didn't do a very good job of either of those things, but it was fun. So it's a cool little game. I would like to play it some more. If I saw a copy, I may well pick one up. I didn't feel like I had to immediately rush out and track it down on some whatever corner of the internet, but it was a nice game. Another game I played on BGA around the same time, Mapmaker, the gerrymandering game, was an interesting comparison for me as well. I thought that was also a cool game in which you're dividing up areas and you're wanting to do it in such a way that you end up coming out ahead. But unlike Nuggets, the control markers are all on the board at the start, and so there's not that hidden information bluffing kind of element that Nuggets has. But
yeah,
nice.
There's a little bit more bluffing in it, but it's more perfect information in the Mapmaker game. But actually, there's definitely some similarities in that. Like, and Mapmaker is explicitly 2-player, where you're cutting up the board and then trying to win the majority.
So we had another amount of segments planned, but then we got too excited talking about games, so we're going to skip an amount of them. And we're going straight to the news.
The news!
The news. So Nicholas volunteered me for this segment as he said that I was the one who spent the most of their life wasted on BGG.
I phrased
basically.
it a bit more nicely.
Oh, yeah. I knew what you meant, though. I've just been noting down a few things that I've come across in the last week or two. So we've got the forthcoming expansion for Knizia's recent Mille Fiori. Mille Fiori is a game that we've been playing a ton recently in my group, and I think it's Knizia's most modern feeling game, really, in that it has all these separate scoring systems which aren't really connected to each other, and it's a drafting game. It's been a really easy sell to people for that reason, because it appeals to both OG fans and more modern fans. The expansion, The Masterworks, looks like it really dials up that modernity. There are even more subsystems, new types of cards. You get to create your own little display, which scores at the end of the game. I'm curious. I will definitely try it, but we'll see. I've been enjoying the base game a lot, so it'll be interesting to see what he's done with that. Also in Knizia news, Huang, which is the remake of Yellow and Yangtze, which was the sequel to Tigris and Euphrates, has just completed on GameFound. This looks like a big production. There are minis, there is stretch goals, there's all of that kind of stuff. I won't be getting a copy. I played Yellow and Yangtze, I liked it, but I would always play Tigris and Euphrates given the opportunity to play one of those two games. So there's not really any need for me to have it, but it will be getting to more people, which is good, and contains as well the planned expansion for Yellow and Yangtze, which never appeared because of some kind of contract situation dispute between Knizia and Grail Games. So this was called the Royal Palace expansion, and it's now included in this this crowdfunded edition of Huang. So that looks like it adds various different modules that you can use in the game, which...
Yeah, I was supposed to comment that you're not the public for that. But if you were interested in Yellow and Yangtze, would you participate in the crowdfunding of this one, or...
Well, yeah. I not if I owned a copy of Yellow and Yangtze. I think if I didn't own Yellow and Yangtze or Tigris and Euphrates, then perhaps I'm a little skeptical of the usability of some of the components in this new edition. But it does sound like they rather amusingly they added on the option to pay extra to get some simpler components to replace the minis. So that option's there if your sensibilities are more on the wooden cubes side of things. So that was Huang.
I like that we're now luxury market.
Another couple of things coming out soon, but actually old games, are a couple of Sid Saxon reissues. So Renegade has picked up the rights to do yet another edition of Acquire, which we talked about earlier. It's been through many different iterations. Hard to beat the sort of the classic 60s edition with its sort of plastic ridged grid and very simple tiles. But I know there was a 90s edition with sort of 3D hotel buildings, which was really popular.
It is very big though.
Yeah.
I have it. It's very big. I loved it at the time because I was dumber, and now I would go for a more minimalist one.
And it looks like, the edition I ended up buying, having been taught it by a friend on one of these lovely 60s classic editions. I bought the edition that was available at the time, which was horrible, cheap thin cardboard, terrible tiles, these awful tile racks that you had to build yourself out of cardboard, and they fell apart. It was really just one of the worst. Was it one of
the Hasbro ones?
Yeah, it was a Hasbro one, and it was one of the worst produced games I've come across. And I eventually just got myself a used 60s copy. This edition looks promising. It looks like it has those. They've gone with the 3D buildings again, but I don't think it's quite as large as that earlier edition. So, anything that gets this game played some more, I think is a good thing. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how it looks. I know the edition a few years ago, they made some changes to the rules, sacrilege, which weren't generally loved. It looks like with this edition they've gone back to the classic rules, possibly with the option to include some of the new rules as well. So it looks like they've gone a route that will hopefully please everyone. And then there's a sort of traditional thing in British news shows of the item which they call the "and finally" item, and this is usually where you've had some your serious news, and then you say "and finally," and it will be some crazy tale of something that's gone on a humour story essentially. So, and finally, we have the expansion I read about the other day, which is the Catan Soccer Fever scenario. I don't know if either of you have seen this. But
I
this
have
is
seen the page for it this afternoon. What the hell is this?
So
I've
this
seen a
is
thread on Board Game Geek which was, this is early for an April joke.
yeah. So this is a scenario / expansion for Catan in which soccer comes to the island of Catan, and every time you build a city or settlement, you get to participate in a soccer match, which involves flicking a ball at a 3D constructed goal. The ball is designed in such a way that it can land colour side up or not. You score goals, which will give you benefits in the game. I think the winner of the match at the end of the game gets bonus points. The full rules aren't available, but it looks suitably ridiculous. It definitely gave me Carcassonne the Catapult vibes.
I was like, this officially sacralizes Catan as one of the big, right? You need your Catapult or you need your Alvin and Dexter expansion to be
Right.
sacralized as a big family game with too many expansions.
Yeah, I saw it on the BGG hotness and I didn't click on it. I was like, what is this nonsense? And what 50 people decided to spam the page to get it onto the hotness? Because I assumed it was just like some small group of soccer fans or something. It was like, hey boys, we're getting this to the front page. And
No, Mark,
that
you
sounds
clicked
incredible.
on it. That's how it gets to the front page.
Yeah, right. And so, that sounds incredible. Just add some goofy nonsense to Catan. It has my full endorsement. I've not played it. I don't know anything about it. It sounds incredible.
It adds a dexterity game to Catan. And that's the part where I'm supposed to find a suitable transition to the fun mail. So, dear listeners, you know what's coming. You've heard the jingle. My co-hosts haven't. They don't know what's coming to them. It's time for the audience questions. We have 4 questions today from long-time listeners. Long-time listener Bass wrote, would you rather play a Euro-style game in real life with fun people or play an OG game online and asynchronously? That's a hard question, isn't it?
Well,
It is a tough question.
I do have an answer.
Please go.
I did have to think about it for a second. To a certain extent, there's no right or wrong answer here. If you could put it to anyone. This style of game that you like, this style of game that you don't, but with people that you enjoy. So I choose my groups and I choose who to play with based on the people that I get along with the most. And I'm lucky that a lot of the time it also coincides with the games that I like, but that's not always the case. And I'm actually really good friends and play board games with some people who we don't share many board game tastes, but we enjoy each other's company enough. And so that, like, the social elements are first and foremost to me. So like if I'm enjoying the company, it almost doesn't matter what we're playing. That said, if I have a choice of game, I'm going to choose an OG game over something that's a little bit, not as great to me. But the reason I like a lot of OG games is because it enhances the social experience. But that is first and foremost to me. So I think that has to be my answer.
Yeah, so it wasn't specified, I don't think, who the async OG game was being played with. If we're talking about a completely impersonal, I don't know who these people are, I don't speak to them during the game, there's no interaction in above the table, then I would pick the game with people I know and people I like, even if it's a game that I'm not that keen on. But I've had some fantastic, not just live online games, but also async games with the guild, particularly I'm thinking of the Tigris and Euphrates tournament recently. That's just been a huge amount of fun. But the reason it's fun is because that we've built that social layer on top of it. We've got to know each other a bit. We've got to know each other's personalities in the games. We've got some, running jokes, all that kind of good stuff that you get at the table. So that I wouldn't want to disparage, but yeah, I'm not into the idea of playing online just to get my fix of a particular game. It needs to have some kind of social element. I want to know who the other players are. And I think absolutely. the thing that I love about OG games is that they make you care about who the other players are.
Yes. Yeah, because player personality matters. And so, who you're playing with definitely matters. And yeah, like, not to disparage asynchronous games. Like, I've had some really fun sessions with the two of you, among others. So it can actually be really fun, but it is, when I'm playing with strangers asynchronously, it's just because I want to learn a game. Like, at that point, a lot of the appeal of gaming goes away for me. And so you can recreate some of that asynchronously, and it's a lot of fun. So I don't want to disparage it at all, because like, at any given point anymore, I'm probably in an asynchronous game with one or more guildies, and I'm probably having a good time with it. But like you say, we have that social infrastructure.
Yeah, I could be a smartass and like answer the question in a way that I could be a smartass and answer the question as written, which is, would you like to play in real life with fun people? And like, fun people is not enough for me to want to play with them in real life. I want to play with friends, but I assume that's what he meant, right? Yeah, of course, I'd rather play with friends than playing OG games online and asynchronously. At the same time, all of us three are in the Tigris and Euphrates tournament.
Yes.
But I would say that on my side, I feel like I am starting to get less interested in the second tournament of Tigris and Euphrates than I was in the first one. Not because I'm losing, but because I think I participated in the first one. I was very hyped to participate, to do a communal effort to get the guild going, and there was something community based on it. So even though I'm playing asynchronously, I did it for the people more than for my own enjoyment of the game. I love playing games online against placeless people, but they tend to be video games that are designed around that concept, and I don't think that OG games are very conducive to that. So
I think some of them much more so than others as well.
Yeah.
Like some of the ones, like the action point kind of games, that actually can work quite well because you get to do quite a lot on your one turn, and then you wait, and then you get your next turn, you get to do quite a lot. The ones that really don't work very well at all are when it's constantly needs to be bouncing back and forth between the players, like an auction, an open auction or something like that. It's just not really playable async.
And as Mark said, initially when I joined the Discord server, I was like, cool, that will allow me to playtest games, but that's not the end in itself because I'm not very interested in that. And the reason why I keep playing on the Discord server is that there is camera and human interactions, actually.
Real-time interactions, yeah. And so it's a little bit closer to the over-the-table experience.
Yeah. And it turns out you're all fun people, so. Second question. Long-time listener Dennis wrote, how would you manipulate your co-hosts to do your bidding in a negotiation or a shared incentive game? I have had time to think about an answer, so I can go first. I would not, to some extent. Like, I'm a strong believer in the idea that I should not outright manipulate and lie to other people, because if they, whenever possible, like, especially in the early game situation, because if they catch up to it, I get a reputation of being a liar and that I should not be trusted or not be negotiated with. So what I will try is I will tell people things that I have managed to convince myself of. That's the least generous statement I can tell of myself. And then Mark doesn't trust me and we lose the game anyway. Of course, I would tell something that is like 10% more advantageous to me than to him, but it's mutually beneficial. Or at least I believe it. And if another player comes and demonstrates that I'm full of shit, then I will retract the statement instead of continuing to lie by accident.
Yeah, I mean, there's some, you don't want to manipulate or lie unless you need to. And that's a choice that you get to make. It's not always the choice I make. So sometimes if you just throw the game into some chaos with some manipulation, like, you're the first person to have the target on your back, but then you can throw the game into a certain state that allows you to take advantage of it if you're more ready for it. And you're not necessarily the last one who's going to have the target on your back, which is sometimes the worst thing to do in games like that with a shared incentive game. It's the last person. We're like, oh, this person's winning. We need to make sure that we mitigate that. And that allows you to jump ahead from like the second or third spot. So sometimes, honestly, like, I'll be the one to break the virtuous circle. And it's because, like, depending on the game length, especially if I kind of know the game cadence and game length, I know that, like, all right, I'm going to be, if the game ended 40% of the way through, I'm in last place, but I know that there's enough opportunity for me to come back that I'll be there at the end. and I will do it relatively unimpeded because nobody's going to be worried about me until that very last portion of the game. So sometimes I'll be the one to do that and just like create a grudge. There's also the chestnut of like, you mentioned to somebody, if you don't betray, like Nicholas, if you don't betray Martin, like he's absolutely going to. Just look at this board state. So you better do it first. And so like I have no skin in the game, but it's just like trying to goad two other people into it. So I don't know if that would work, but like it has worked occasionally for me where I create paranoia in others.
Yeah.
So that's a classic. This is a Dennis question too. This is a horrible question.
That's a horrible question.
I love it.
The point is, he's trying to gather intel on us because the question formulated is, how would you betray the two co-hosts here? Not any person. These two, how do you get under the skin?
Yeah,
I want to know how to win the game.
This is bullshit,
He's
Dennis.
trying to, he's absolutely trying to bullshit us.
This is bullshit, Dennis.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dennis, we hear you. And,
so I'm going to say absolutely nothing, and then Dennis has nothing to work with there. So.
But I think the important thing that Mark said is depending on the game. Because for all that I say, there are games that are conducive, including in their rules, to lying, for instance. And of course, if it's the game to lie, especially lying on hidden information, that makes sense that you would do it. If you have to conceal stuff, if you have blind bidding, if you have some Sheriff of Nottingham thing going on, yeah, of course you will lie. That's the game. If there's a shared understanding that you are telling the truth and not misrepresenting the board state, like says something like Marrakesh, all the information is open. So what I would not want is try to misdirect what the board state actually is.
That makes sense, yeah.
But if the game is about lying, then it's fair game to... Martin, you're adamant on saying nothing about it.
Well, I think I prefer the kind of games where this happens through the board state than where it's just purely lying and pointing out who to target. And that's isn't my favorite. That very meta game heavy kind of thing is not my favorite type of game. I will play games like that, but yeah, I think I prefer ones where I get someone to help me by setting up an opportunity for them on the board. Marrakesh we were talking about earlier is a great example of that, and I find that more interesting, I think.
Yeah, well, and I found that to be a little bit of a line in the sand, even sometimes among OG gamers, where like that metagame stuff and like overt lying when the game allows for it. Like I sink into that. I adore a lot of that, and it depends on the execution and stuff. But I've also discovered that a lot of people don't, and so you have to be careful about it. I try to be very clear about what type of game it is when I'm introducing it to someone, so that they know what they're getting into and they can make an informed decision about it. And I'm not tricking them before the game starts into playing, because then you're just gonna have a bad time. So there are some games that I love that are like that, because that meta game that exists above it is kind of where I try to turn games into that sometimes that aren't, because I enjoy it.
But, we've noticed.
Yeah, that's the best part. I know, I'm fully in support of that. Like, I actually don't enjoy official negotiation games that often, but I like turning all the games into diplomacy, essentially.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic. But again, like you need to gauge it with the group, and that's important too. So facilitating the social experience is more important to me than just doing whatever the hell I want. So anyway, on to the next question. We've talked about this one enough.
Long-time listener ChatGPT wrote...
GPT.
Can you teach me how to properly pronounce Spiel des Jahres without sounding like a bratwurst stuck in my throat? Well, I think I just did.
All right, so I'm an American, so my answer is no. So I'm going to leave this one to YouTube.
I was tempted to answer just no. But then this week, I saw a thread that was titled like, why do content creator pronounced it Uwe? Because someone was like very mad that Uwe Rosenberg's name was mispronounced.
I do my best, but holy heck, it can be hard. Yeah,
that's the do your best, because you have two sides to the coin. One of it is, of course, you should not intentionally mispronounce other people's name. And I understand the idea that as an adult, you are bound to be curious about the world and informing yourself in a way that you do not misrepresent other people or do things that are culturally insensitive or whatnot. but mispronouncing the name of a white guy in his 50s, I don't think that's a big insult.
Well, you get this in any genre. So like, I'll listen to chess YouTubers, and there are great chess players from across the world, and nobody in any country is going to be able to pronounce all the different ones correctly. And so, the ones that I like the best do their best. They try to do their due diligence, but like occasionally they're going to get something wrong. And, all you can do is your best. And then, okay, I was mispronouncing that. Great. And then you correct yourself the next time. So, yeah, I'm sure. I don't know what I originally thought the Spiel des Jahres what was pronounced as, but I'm sure it was incorrect for a long time in my head.
You can just pronounce it SDJ.
SDJ, yeah, there you go.
And especially as a guild that is going to deal a lot with like German game names, I don't want pronunciation to be some sort of elitist barrier of entry.
Well, I mean, this is the computers trying to break us up. This is the ChatGPT question, so I'm not surprised. And I mean, we're on a podcast right now with someone in the UK, someone in France, someone in the US. And like that's a really cool part of this guild. Like I'll tell people that I play games live, not just asynchronously, with people in other countries, and they're like, "Oh, that's interesting. How'd you fall into that?" And you can curate a group like this from across the world. And I think that's pretty cool. But yeah, like occasionally we get into like we discover some like cultural difference, and that's fun because you're learning at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Besides the fact that, if I go into linguistics a bit, there is no correct pronunciation of things. Let's cut that segment. Next question. Long-time listener Andy wrote, what is your favorite of the OG Guild's Hall of Fame games, and what is your least favorite? So now you have to load the page.
Oh, I know the answer to this one already. I was looking at it earlier when I was trying to pick my last minute choices, but I mean, I've already mentioned my favorite game is Tigris and Euphrates. It has been from pretty much when I first played it, and I don't see it not being anytime soon. I would be amazed. And just playing it loads online recently, not just in the tournament, but also a group of four of us from the guild has played like 30 games in a row or something, and it's just so good. It's so good to be playing it. Least favorite, I would pick Hansa Teutonica, which was a game I played when I was just getting disillusioned with the sort of modern style, and I just kind of wrote it off as another one of these games. And then over the years, people I like and who generally share opinions with kept talking about it and saying it's great, and I thought I should probably try it again. Maybe I was just in a bad mood that day, and then fairly recently I tried it again, and it still just didn't do anything for me. So maybe it's not maybe it's not Hansa Teutonica's fault, but it's not one that I feel like I need to beat myself into liking. So
I think the answer is the same for favorite for me. So Tigris and Euphrates is my favorite. For a second I had a fever dream and thought Mexico was in there, and I was gonna waffle between the two, since in my head those are competing for love in my mind.
Come back next year.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, Tigris and Euphrates is just so brilliant with what it does, and the emergent depth and everything that you can do in such a simple structure, but also the freedom and creativity that you have. It's a design masterwork. If you ask me in my lifetime, what's been the best board game design to come out ever, that would probably be my answer. It's among my favorite games, period, not just within OGs. But it's also, it's an order of magnitude more combative, more directly combative than some in the Hall of Fame. And so it's one that's maybe a little bit more polarizing than some. Something like a Carcassonne might actually have more universality, so which is interesting, and just speaks to differing preferences even within this sort of subgenre that we've defined. I've put off enough time for my least favorite, which is a hard question. One of the things that I love about OGs is that, and I've used this line before in the guild, they're not always 9s or 10s for me, but they're floor. So if the ceiling is 9 or 10 with my favorites, they're not always 9s or 10s, but the floor is pretty high. So I don't have any OGs that I rank 1 to 4 on a 10-point scale, because generally speaking, it's going to be a really solid experience. So like I'll have 5s and 6s, but that's as low as they go. And in the Hall of Fame, it's even harder. So I'm going to say Ticket to Ride, just because it doesn't quite do enough for me. It doesn't move my emotional meter enough. It's a very streamlined, intuitive design. My favorite Tickets to Ride are actually later in the series, not the base game, that add some different things going on in them and create some new considerations and tensions while still being very interactive and very streamlined. So it's a little bit too minimalistic maybe for me, and I'm playing and I'm like, oh yeah, this is smooth, this is easy, and I never get those spikes of emotion that I get in something like a Tigris and Euphrates or a Hansa Teutonica or a Bonanza, and a lot of times that's what I play for. So that's probably my least favorite, but even Ticket to Ride, like if you pulled that and we were playing it, I would enjoy myself.
I'll start with least favorite. The paranoid part of my brain feels like Andy has designed this question to trigger a rant about high society. Unfortunately for him, that will not be my answer, and I can feel in my heart that I will be genuine about it. My least favorite game amongst the OG Guilds Hall of Fame is a tie between the games that I could not have been asked to play yet, which will be Tikal, Taj Mahal, and Hansa Teutonica. I will borrow an expression from Mark and say that the prospect of playing these 3 games has not moved enough my emotional meter that I've actually sought playing them. And that's all I can say about them so far.
Sure.
At some point, I will hate them for other reasons, I guess.
You talked about your favorite things being auctions and area majority, area control. So certainly I can see Taj Mahal and Tikal having some stuff that would appeal to you, but they are
okay. I have to be more thorough then. The thing with Taj Mahal is I read the rules and then I forget its central gimmick because it doesn't seem to do anything that I haven't seen anywhere, and then I forget about it for 2 years, and then I don't remember which game is Taj Mahal and which game is Amun-Re, which I have also not played.
Okay.
That's the entirety of it. And Tikal, I feel I will die from action points.
Yeah,
I think I will die from analysis paralysis. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I will enjoy it or not. I don't even remember what the game is about now. I just remember the cover, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's the action points. Like I don't have analysis paralysis issues with those I played with in Mexico, but I've started to see a little bit of that when I've played Tikal, because it goes from 6 action points to 10, and so the breadth of options you have gets that much wider, and it can be a little tricky. So you got to be careful with it. A lot of people have. I've seen people play with timers and stuff like that in Tikal. I've seen that in the forums when people are discussing it. I do still enjoy it though, so but I definitely get that criticism.
I would probably rather play Blitz chess.
So what's your favorite, Nicholas? What's your favorite?
Oh, well, I've shot on 2 of them. I can go on Hansa Teutonica for a second. Essentially, I feel like I will have the reaction of Martin when playing it, and Martin having had the reaction of Martin reinforces me in my opinion of not trying it yet. Favorite, the problem is that 15 out of the 25 games are games that are rate equally highly, so it's hard for me to pick a favorite, and I will cop out the answer. Instead, I will tell you the one I would be the most hyped to play right now, and that would be Acquire, for all the reasons Martin told us about earlier. Also because there has been no... it's the same problem that you have with Catan, which is that I can't find players who are excited by the prospect of shareholding. Interest dies instantly, and it's hard to tell to people that shareholding means we own game components together and we cooperate in making these game components score us boatloads of points. That is the best thing ever. The problem is that its real life equivalent sounds boring as crumbs. So that's why. And also there has been no good implementation. I hear someone is working on it right now, so that we could maybe play it with each other at some point.
Yeah, that could be fun. Good question, Andy. Good question.
If you have other fan mail for now, because I have not devised a better solution because I'm not very organized, will be by private message on Board Game Geek to Nicolas Weiss, myself. If you don't know how to spell it, Well, you just go on the forums and you will find me. I post there all the time, either big twirly yellow circle. You can find it very easily. Also, if you're listening from distant future, you can stop now. My inbox is full. Thank you very much. We have moved on to a new solution. This was Proof of Concept episode 0. If you're a member of the guild, we will open a thread for feedback, probably the same one that you found the episode on. And we would also like to recruit more one-time hosts for future episodes or recurrent hosts for future episodes. Maybe that someone finds in their life the time and energy to produce better musical jingles for this that don't make everyone's ears bleed. Mark and Martin are smiling right now, but they have not heard them. They don't know the pain you've been going through right now because they're from the past where everyone was pure and innocent. More importantly, you, yes, you, dear listener, if you have heard at the very beginning, I have said this is an entitled podcast, but you could be the one who finds the actual name for the podcast. So please go at your keyboard /touchscreen /banana phone or whatever cool kids are doing these days, and that's about it. Beep, 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 beep. Hi, it's Future Nicolas again. It turns out we have forgotten a critical piece of guild advertisement. If you like the idea of playing live and online with other guild members, but don't know how to start, or if you're a regular Discord server member, but don't find timings at which gaming with other people usually works, I would suggest you don't book anything on the 3rd weekend of May, for reasons that might be announced sooner or later. Future Nicolas off! Beep 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 beep.
Yes, it was lovely being on. Again, my name's been Mark. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy talking about these games. I enjoy hanging out and chatting with you guys. And whatever form the podcast takes moving forward, I will be interested to see it take shape. So if you want to chat with me on Board Game Geek, I'm MA Wilson 4, and you can my inbox is open, or you can find me on the OG Guild itself. I also run a website devoted to games, bubblingthroughdungeons.com. It started as a Dungeons and Dragons website, as you might imagine from the title, but it also has a lot going on with board games these days as well. So I'm active there. It has a blog. I have some D&D stuff, but I won't talk any more about that there. But if you haven't heard about it, I encourage you to check that out.
And you will find my writing about games mostly on BGG, obviously. I'm TOTD Martin, the guy with the 69 for an avatar. I have a blog. I pop up in various guilds and forums and geek lists and all over the place, so I'm sure you will run into me. I also write reviews for a magazine, a UK-based magazine, Tabletop Spirit, which is free to download, a PDF. It's quite nicely produced. There's some interesting stuff in there, so that would be one to check out as well.
And I'm relatively useless. You can find me on the OG Guild's forums, turning threads into off-topic all the time, and that's about it. Now, this is the part normally where we find a way to... We say goodbye to people, and then we continue saying goodbye or having some inane conversation while some outro music is slowly fading out. So we could, like, I don't know, pretend that we're going to go play a game now, even though it's super late here, and the only thing I want to do...
Yeah, you guys are right. It's probably pretty late for y'all, so...
Getting on.
This is a placeholder musical theme for the entitled OG Games podcast. Release me from my torment, find a name for the whole thing.